Hello, advanced social psychology students. Welcome to Unit 3, Module 11, Chapter 10, Working Groups, Performance and Decision Making, Part 1. There's going to be 2 lecture videos this week because it's a lot of material. Okay, so let me begin by calling up the PowerPoint slides. Okay, so when we're talking about working groups, performance, and decision making, of course, one of the first things that we need to do is to define what it means to be a group. And so let's go right into that. What is a group? Well, it sounds like it's really easy to decide what a group is. Everyone knows what a group is. Why do we even have to go and define it? And a lot of people will say, well, we're a group if we have something in common. Well, um, uh, I'm a female. Any of you that are a female, in fact, all females in the world, we have that in common. Are all females a group? Well, I'm not even going to ever meet most of the females on the planet. So are we a group or aren't we a group? Do we have to be doing a similar task? Well, the picture that's on the screen here is these people are all on the freeway together. They're all on the same freeway with the same task of trying to get wherever they're going as quickly as they can. Are they a group? Because they sort of have a common goal. Well, most of us are they a group? Are they not? What are we talking about here? And so social psychologists decided to define group as absolutely narrowly as possible. They almost came up with the most narrow definition they could. And they said, after we understand this very narrow definition of a group, then we can expand it and try to explain more broad definitions of groups. However, I think this definition was created, many, many decades ago, and we're still trying to figure out these groups. So there's a lot to do here. So when a social psychologist is talking about a group, or if you're looking at the group literature, the social psychology groups literature, we're going to define a group of having at least 2 people. In fact, when there's only 2, we tend to call it a dyad, and a dyad can be seen as a part of a group. But dyads are so different from larger groups with 3 or more people, that sometimes people just put dyad in its whole own category. But so to be a group, though, you have to have at least 2 people, 2 or more people. They have to interact in some way. They have to share common goals. They have to have a stable relationship. Now, that doesn't mean long. So when you bring people into the laboratory and you have them, I don't know, brainstorm for 20 minutes, there are 2 or more of them. They're interacting, sharing their ideas as they brainstorm. They share a common goal, come up with as many brainstorming ideas as they can. They have a stable relationship. It's not long. It's only going to last for 20 minutes, but it's stable. They know for the next 20 minutes, we're going to be doing this together and we're going to be together. And they're somehow interdependent. So the more you come up with, sort of the less I have to. I hear your ideas that may affect my thinking. They're interdependent in some way. And they have to perceive that they are, in fact, a group. And so that's what gets kind of tricky, because it's the self-perception piece that we have very little control of if you're in a laboratory trying to study groups. I often look at classes that I'm teaching. Definitely a class like you guys right now. There's more than 2 of you, or the class wouldn't have made. You're interacting because you're doing these unharmonized. You're interacting as you teach one another about the articles and discuss the articles and things like that. You share common goals, doing well in this course, learning this, mastering this material. You have a stable relationship for 16 weeks. You're going to be together. You're definitely interdependent, especially in the discussions about the articles. What one of you says is going to impact greatly what the next one is saying, and so on. Some of you may perceive that you're in this group called Advanced Social Psychology for this semester. Others of you might go, I'm not in a group. I'm just taking this online class. I've never met any of these people. I'm never going to see them in real life. I live in a different state. We're not a group. And so sometimes, depending upon, like, in order for us to call our class a group as a researcher, I'd have to interview or send a survey out and see to what extent do you guys feel like you're a group. And only if all of you felt like you're a group are you really a group, according to social psychologists. Okay, so sports teams are really easy to call a group. I mean, they meet all of the goals. There's more than two people, they interact, they share a common goal of winning, they have a stable relationship, they're together, until that season is out. They're definitely interdependent on one another, especially, football and basketball, even more so than baseball or swimming, but they're even in baseball and swimming, they're very interdependent. And they definitely perceive that they're in fact a group. They all wear the same uniforms and rah, rah, rah. The two cats here, are a dyad, and then we can look at other types of groups. Now, when we look at, your book starts talking about the characteristics of groups. And so one big characteristic is called entitativity. In the literature now, that word really isn't used. It's sort of an older word. Nowadays, we're more likely to call it cohesion. But same thing, groupiness, cohesion, entitativity. It's the perception by the group members themselves or by other people who are looking at them that the people together are a group. And so it's sort of like, how groupy is the group? And the research, it was very clear for decades that there are three things that really affect how groupy the group will feel. Does that kind of make sense? So are you going to feel as groupy, high in cohesion, as groupiness being high in a sports team like these three like the baseball players pictured here? Or less groupy, like the advanced social psychology students in an online class who never have been in the same room together. Like, where are you on this groupiness scale? Does that kind of make sense? And so some of the variables that will affect it, one is similarity. The more similar you feel to the other group members, the more likely you are to feel really groupy in the group. And so the military, they love to make their teams, their groups, be really high in cohesion and really high in groupiness. And so they do what they can to make the team members all feel as similar to one another as they can, to the point where they shave their head so that they look as similar and have them wear the same uniform so they even look similar to one another. They try to take out the individual so you feel like you're all very similar. That's going to increase this cohesion or groupiness feel. Also, how much communication and interdependence is there? The more dependent you are on your group members and they are on you, the more groupiness the team is going to feel, the group is going to feel. If I know, like in advanced social psychology right now, you're somewhat interdependent, but really you can earn an A in this class even if everyone else in the class fails. Does that make sense? So to some extent, your goal of learning this material well and doing well on the exam, you can reach that goal without anyone else if you had to. Now, it'll be much easier for you and much more interesting if everyone is sharing really good information with one another and we're all spurring one another on to be the best versions of ourselves as an advanced social psychology student. But you can see how we're not as reliant on one another, as interdependent on one another. We're not communicating as much with one another as, let's say, a football team that's all on the field at that moment, or a basketball team, that in order for us to win this game, we are on the floor together, passing the ball back and forth with one another, completely interdependent on one another. It's impossible for one of us to win without the others all winning. So you can see how the communication and interdependence is going to increase that feeling of groupiness. And then the last one is social identity. So we talked before about that personal identity, the personal to social identity continuum. So the more you are on that wheel, and we talked about how you've got all these different social identities. And if you're forgetting about this, you can go back to the chapter 3 lecture video where we talk about social identity. And so the more you're on the spoke of the wheel that has to do with this group, like let's say advanced social psychology, and the higher you are toward the social identity part, and not rather than seeing yourself as a individual, unique and different from everyone else on the planet, the higher your social identity on that continuum, with the social identity being this group, a member of this group, then the more groupy the group is going to feel to you. Okay. Now, as I said, all of this is absolutely correct. This is all in your textbook. It's absolutely correct. But it is kind of old. Your textbook's old, but it's free, right? The research is sort of, for lack of a better term, moved on a little bit. And now we sort of see cohesion as having 3 different types. They don't line up perfectly with similarity, interdependence, and social identity. So let me just give you what they are. So one of them is attraction. So you can have attraction where everyone in the group likes everyone else in the group, but also attraction of you to the group as a whole. How much do you look at this group and you're like, wow, I really like this group. And man, I'm excited to be a member of them. And how much do you like each of the actual members in the group? The higher those are, the higher your attraction will be, and the more cohesive the group will be. Now, I will say this part of attraction or liking, some research finds it's not that important when you parse out the others. A lot of studies find, though, that it stands on its own, that this by itself leads to some amount of cohesion. Another different kind of cohesion is unity or group pride, okay? So how much does the group all feel like they're really close to one another? How much does the group sort of share this oneness feel? The more they feel this oneness, the higher their unity, and the more cohesive they're going to be. Also, how much do you feel like you belong to this group? That you are like a member of this group. You're part of it. And it wouldn't be the same without you there. You're needed. They need you. You need them. That's going to, again, be this sense of unity or pride. And these 2 things lead to this type of cohesion that has to do with unity. And the last kind of cohesion has to do with teamwork or task commitment. And this is like 2 different pieces. One part, I'm going to do the bottom one first, has to do with like the group morale. Like as a group, are we like, woo, 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 we really are awesome. Look at how great we are. And each of the member of the group kind of is like, we're amazing. And that, when you have that spirit of, boy, we're amazing, that's going to increase teamwork, this teamwork aspect of cohesion, or how committed we are to the group and the task and the group getting the task done. Another piece of it is collective efficacy. So we talked before about self-efficacy, again, back in chapter 3 when we were talking about the self, where we talked about self-efficacy is how good do you think you are at a particular task? And I think the example that I used in the lecture video was research that had been done where they give kids who are about 10 or so rings and then a stake in the ground, and they're supposed to throw the ring and have it go around the stake. And it's sort of like, how good do you think you are at this particular task? How good do you think you are at writing? That's your self-efficacy. Well, a group can have efficacy. So this group, how much does each member of the group believe that this group can get this task done and do it well in a reasonable amount of time? That's collective efficacy. How confident are each of us that we'll be able to get this task done if we work together? So right now you could ask, and I mean, I know it's toward the end of the semester, but as an advanced social psychology student, if we keep working together the way that we have and keep, these harmonized video discussions going, how much do we think that we'll all be able to get an A or a B in this class? That's the collective efficacy. And collective efficacy and group morale combine together individually and together to lead to this teamwork, sense of teamwork, which leads to the sense of cohesion. So the implication of cohesion really being these three different kinds of cohesion, there's not just one kind of cohesion now. Groupiness is sort of different. Groupiness can be attraction, groupiness can be unity, groupiness can be task commitment or teamwork. And so the implication here is that measuring cohesion is really complex because there's different kinds of cohesion. And what happens if you're high in one but low in the other two, or high in two and low in the other one? And you can see how crazy it gets. I say crazy, but like it's not simple at all trying to understand how this all ends up affecting performance and what you can do as a group leader to try to increase performance. However, as complex as it is, and it's complex, research does show that cohesion develops over time in a relatively predictable pattern. And so there's a whole area that is called group development. How does the group go from individuals to a group of people that have cohesion, whether it's attraction, cohesion, unity, cohesion, or teamwork cohesion? And your book talks about one very old model done by Tuckman in 1965. And Tuckman actually developed this model by researching the literature on clinical therapy groups and T groups, not on business teams or sports teams or performance teams. So in some ways, it's not my favorite. No, in most ways, it's not my favorite model. However, it stays in the literature, I think, because it has such intuitive appeal, and it's kind of fun, forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, it all rhymes, we know what the words mean, so it's kind of, it's a nice heuristic. It's very easy to kind of figure it out. Okay, let's go through the theory, and then I'm going to give you a more up-to-date theory, not the most up-to-date, but one that we use even more than this one now. So forming is when the individual members all start to become a group and they're getting to know one another. And as they get to know one another and form a group, there will be conflict. You can't get humans together without having conflict. That's, human relationships are messy and they always have conflict. So he's going to call this conflict storming. And so sometimes with the conflict, there's some members who are just conflict averse. And so they have a really hard time being in a group. They tend to want to work alone most of the time. So some of those members are going to leave right away. They're going to go right from storming to adjourning. But most of them are going to find a way to make peace in with the group, to try to figure out what's going on. All of that conflict, once it's worked out, people can agree to disagree and figure out a way to continue. And as they figure out a way to continue, some members might go, I'm not conflict averse. I like conflict. I can handle it fine. But now I can see how this group, what the norms are going to be. I can see how this group is going to settle out, and my skills aren't really needed here. So I'm going to leave the group. So some of the people leave in the storming phase because as it's settling into the norming phase, they're not needed. Then the norms, this is like the peace and the calm, where the group's kind of figured out their process and procedures, and they're doing their thing. They're working. And I'm sorry, they're forming their peace, they're calm. Some will leave because, again, they're not needed. And then they're going to go to the performing stage. And this is where they're going to be doing their thing, getting the project done, whatever it is. Their whole focus is on the task, not on getting along with one another. In the norming, there's going to be lots of focused on getting along with one another, and almost policies and procedures are, what are we going to do if we don't get along? How are we going to resolve that? That's all in the norming phase. But then we go to the performing phase where we're going to actually focus on the task and get it done. And then if the task has an end, then once the task is done, we'll adjourn. So if the group was brought together, like to hire someone, once the person's, like it's a search committee, then once the person's hired, the group can disband. Many groups last for decades, right? Because it's a work thing that they're doing and it's just going to go on. And then the group is over and they all leave and go their own way. Okay, so forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Kind of a fun way to think about it. Now, I'm going to teach you about one that it's still pretty old. It's 1982 is when Moreland and Levine came up with their group socialization theory. But this is the theory that that when I look in the literature, that's the one that I see more than any of the others. And so they have in their group socialization theory, excuse me, they say that members go from being prospective members of a group, then they're a new member of the group, then they're a full member of the group. And some will be full members and stay full members their whole lives. Some will go from being a full member to a former member because they leave the group. But sometimes there'll be some kind of a falling out and they'll take this role as a marginal group member for a bit and before they hit the former member or ex-member status. They identify 5 different phases: investigation, socialization, maintenance, resocialization, remembrance. We'll talk about those in a minute, and the processes. So let's, and they talk about these transition points. So you're going to enter it, you're going to be accepted into the group, you might diverge from the group, and then you're going to exit the group. So the easiest way to see all of these processes is a graph that they have. And I just love this. To me, this just makes so much sense. So on the y-axis here, we have commitment, right? How committed you are to the group, how groupy is the group. This is where we could think of, cohesion being really high here and very low here. Here's the group membership for the member. You're a prospective member here. You have pretty low commitment. Then as a new member, you're really increasing your commitment to the group. As a full member, you have the highest commitment you're ever going to have. Then if there's some issues, you might become a marginal member for a little bit and your commitment's going down and down. And then you leave the group and you're an ex-member. And so you can see the membership is up here on the top. You can see that while you're a prospective member, you're in what we call the investigation stage. And everything that's above this line is what the group member does. Everything that's below this line, everything that's above the line is what the group is doing. Everything that's below the line is what the group member is doing. Okay, so during this investigation stage, the group is trying to recruit this prospective member. Join us, join us. And the members doing some reconnaissance. They're trying to figure out, they're investigating it. Do I want to be part of this group or don't I? And if at the end they decide they do, at this point, they're going to enter and become part of the group, right? So now they're a new member and they're in what they call the socialization stage. So during the socialization stage, the group is trying to accommodate this new person. What do you need us to do in order to join us? Like we can, accommodate you. We can change the rules a little bit if you need us to. We can meet on a different night if this night doesn't work for you. And the group members trying to assimilate to this group. What do they need to do? And as you can see, commitment's just getting higher and higher and higher as the group accommodates and the group member assimilates, and everyone, they're in this new member phase as they're really working to get along. Then the group, now after being a new member, now that new member is accepted into the group as a full member. So that's the transition point of acceptance. Now that this person is a full member, we're in the maintenance stage. And you can stay in the maintenance stage for decades, depending upon what kind of a group it is. And during the maintenance stage, there may be some role negotiation on both sides. But mostly it's just peaceful and you're doing what needs to be done. Now, sometimes it might be that the group member starts to not like being in the group as much, and their commitment is starting to go down some. And if it goes down to a critical point, they're going to be what we call in this divergence point. They're thinking about maybe leaving the group. They're a marginal member right now. They're in this re-socialization stage. And the group is going to try to say, we can accommodate you some because we don't want you to leave, but you also are going to have to assimilate to us and decide if you want to stay. Does that kind of make sense? So during this marginal member period, the member might not be almost not so good at assimilating, and the group isn't as good as accommodating as it might want to be, and the commitment on the person just goes down and down and down till they decide, I'm out of here, and they decide to exit the group. And now they're a full exit member. And the stage where everyone is now is this remembrance stage, where the group has this tradition of, there used to be this person who was part of our group, and this is what they did. And the group member has this reminiscence of, they'll go reminiscence. They're going to have these memories of, I remember what it was like to be part of that group, and I've moved on since then. So let's do an example, I hope it works, of you deciding to be a member of the Cameron group, specifically the member of the MSBS track, the MSBS General Psychology track here at Cameron. So before you started taking classes, you were in this prospective member thing. And we, Cameron, we were out doing some active recruitment, right? You might have talked with the chair of the department or one of the faculty members. You might have got on the website to see what we had to offer. And we had this stuff on the website saying, here, we might be able to meet your needs, your career goals. So you're doing some reconnaissance, looking at what's on the web, speaking with us. We're making ourselves available to you and putting that information out there. You're investigating us, we're investigating you. But then you applied and you got accepted into the program and you entered the program. You're now a new member. And we want your commitment to increase so that you become a full member of the MSBS General Psychology track. During this socialization stage, we had you take the Psych 5000 class. You're supposed to do that in that very first semester, right? And during that class, we're presenting to you all of the expectations, what comprehensive exams are going to be like. You meet each of the faculty members. And we all the time are saying, we want to accommodate you. This is how our group works now. But, we can make things, if you tell us that you need something a little different, we'll do what we can to accommodate you. And you're learning all of the rules that we're setting out and learning what's expected of you. And you're going, yep, I can do that. Yep, I can do that. You're assimilating to what's going to be expected of you, and then asking for accommodations if you feel like something needs to be changed for you, like you need a class that's not offered when we offer it, or you're going to take it at another university and then transfer it in. How are we going to make that work? That's during the socialization stage. And hopefully by the end of that first semester, some people get there much quicker than that, you feel like you're a full member of this group. You've accepted that you have chosen the Cameron University MSBS General Psychology track as your community, and this is where you want to get your degree from now. And you've got a semester behind your belt, knowing, so probably you have some self-efficacy that you think you can do this work. You're now a full member. And we're happy you're here. You're happy. Hopefully you're happy you're here. From time to time, you may need to do some role negotiation, talking with your advisor, talking with an instructor. I can't show up next week because I've got this going on. Fine, you can watch a video to make it up, but you're doing some role negotiation, and hopefully you're enjoying it and we're enjoying you. Now, there might be a student who hits a point where they're like, I don't know if this program is right for me. As I keep taking classes, I'm wondering if I want to be a therapist. As an elective, I took systems theory and I absolutely loved it. And then as another elective, I took counseling theories, and I don't know if the MSBS track is the right one. I think maybe I should be on the MAMH track, maybe uh, being a marriage and family therapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, because with that systems theory class I really loved. So during this time, you might be a marginal member and you're trying to assimilate to the MSBS general psych track, and we're trying to accommodate you. But it may be that during this resocialization stage where we're trying to say, no, just finish the degree. You can always do the other one after if you want. Look, this might meet your goal. This might meet your goal. You'll have to decide if it does. And for some of one or two of you, you might go, no, I really don't want this degree. I need to switch and move into the other degree program. You'll be back over here in the other program. And now you'll be someone who used to be in our program, and we'll remember you, and we'll talk later. There's been other people have done, to a future member, there's been other people have done that, exit members. Some of you, most of you, hopefully, will go from being a full member to then you'll exit that you won't lose commitment or anything. You'll just exit as a full member as you graduate. And so you'll perhaps come to the Cameron graduation, and we've got a great tradition where you get hooded by a faculty member that you choose, and your parents or whoever, your spouse, your kids are in the audience, cheering for you, and you have this wonderful celebration of becoming an ex-member. Now you're a graduate of the program rather than a full member anymore. And so you can see the Moreland and Levine's group socialization theory. And there's something about that. Oh, and time is the x-axis. I should have said that a long time ago. This is time over here. I think you can see what intuitive appeal this has. It can be a little complicated with all of the different, what kind of member are you? What's the entry point? What's the stage that you're in, and what is going on at each stage? But as we've gone through the example and you look at it, you can see how it is intuitively appealing. It resonates with a lot of us. Okay. All right. So that is the theory, the group development theory that I really want you to know, more so than the forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning. This one's kind of cute, but it's pretty superficial. This one's got a lot more research behind it, and it's much more what people talk about. So cohesion, the way we've been talking, like this is how you develop a group, and then it's cohesive, especially when you're full members and commitment is high. But sometimes we think of group cohesion as always being positive. And it is good in that you get cohesive groups have higher member satisfaction. If it's a company, you're going to have less turnover and less stress. And my husband works for City National Bank here in Lawton, Oklahoma. And he tells me all the time how employee turnover is one of the most costly things he has. He wants to keep the people who work for him, who are good, who work with him for good, for as long as he can. They do a lot to select the people, then they do a lot of training on the people. The last thing he wants is for someone to leave, especially if they're really good. And so he wants to do all that he can to increase cohesion among the members of all of the different teams there, because employee turnover costs the organization quite a bit of money. Having to go out and hire someone new is costly, training someone new is costly, and it's stressful for all of the other members. So decreasing that is a huge benefit of having a cohesive team. But I don't want you to think blindly like cohesion is always great. There are some negative aspects of having a really cohesive team. And one is that when a team is really cohesive, when attraction is really high, when teamwork and commitment is really high, where unity is really high, it intensifies the emotional and social processes that are going on in the group. And so emotionally, it can be much more demanding. Like you really care about these people. And so, that it takes more out of you as a group member. You get more, you're more satisfied, but it takes more out of you also. And we're going to talk later. Actually, it's in the part 2 video. We're going to talk about groupthink, which comes from conformity pressure. And groupthink is not something you want as a group. So you can end up also with more hostility sometimes because everyone's so much more emotionally invested that, in a group where you're like, yeah, I belong in the group. That person ended up cheating on someone else and they got fired. Like you're not that emotionally invested, but in a cohesive group, you're very emotionally invested. When you find out one of the group members was cheating or stealing from the company or something, it can be devastating and people can be very angry with the person who broke the norms or the group rules. And so there can be a lot more hostility because everything is intensified. All the good is intensified, which is really nice, but the bad is intensified too. So there are some negative consequences of cohesion, but if you talk to most people in the business world, they want their teams and groups to be as cohesive as they can. They feel like the benefits far outweigh the drawbacks. Okay. Now, let's talk about cohesion and performance because we assume that groups that are cohesive are going to perform better. And if that's true, we want to do whatever we can to make the groups cohesive so that they will perform better. And here's a meta-analysis that was done, it's a long time ago, but Mullen and Cooper, they did this in 1994. And what they found, and other researchers have too, I could have picked any a number of different studies to show here. To be completely upfront, I had this graph already made from a presentation that I had made a long time ago. And so I just didn't make another graph. But this kind of research keeps showing up over and over and over again. And you can see here that cohesion, the correlation between cohesion and performance was real high at 0.25. But look at the correlation between performance and cohesion. Not correlation, the predictive value in the regression formula. Cohesion was related to performance at 0.25, but performance led to cohesion at 0.51, double, twice as important. So while it's true that cohesion leads to performance, performing well is a great way to get your team to feel more cohesive. So rather than spending a whole bunch of time and money, getting everyone on your team to have matching t-shirts and have them all go and get beers one night for a social thing, those are all great. They increase cohesion, which may increase performance. But if you really want to get performance to be high, give the team a task that they'll do well at, whether you need it done or not. Like if you're in charge of the team, have them set up a goal to do a task that that team is going to succeed at. And when they perform well, boy, will that increase their cohesion, which then will make it more likely for them to do the next task, one that you really need them to do well. And of course, it works ideally if even the first task you really need them to do well, and you're not wasting any time at all. Now, in this Mullen and Cooper's meta-analysis, you can see that attraction actually didn't have a big effect on cohesion, but that is usually very unusual. Well, this meta-analysis found it wasn't related. There are other analyses like Beal, Cohen, Burke, and McLennan who found all three were significant and really important, and others since then. So attraction is the one that's the most iffy, but unity is super important, task focus or teamwork or task commitment, really important. But you can see of all of these, the thing that increased cohesion the most was having the team perform well together. Okay. Another thing that's really important, though, are norms, because if you just look at this, you could think, well, I guess this is true. If they perform well, they'll be more cohesive, and that is true. But norms can develop sometimes that actually will hurt performance. And so sometimes a group will come up with a norm that stresses low productivity. And then the more cohesive the group is, the less performance, the lower the performance will be, because the cohesion of everyone getting along is that none of us are going to work that hard and none of us are going to do that well. So if you have a group norm that stresses low productivity, then actually the more groupy the group, the cohesion is going to reduce performance. This is low cohesion, high cohesion. So the more cohesive the group, the worse they'll do if the norm is low productivity. And just to give you an example of this, when I was in high school in the Boston area, I was a salad girl initially at a place called Papagino's. And, I was making my salads and I got promoted to pizza girl. I think I was 16. I was ecstatic. I'd gotten a promotion. So I was now the pizza girl. How thrilling it was. And so after you had to make the pizzas, for any orders that you had at that moment. If you had free time, you were supposed to get the dough ready and kind of get the things flattened out for the next day. And so I'm working really hard and I'm doing what I can, making all the pizzas and trying to get ready for the next day. And I can remember the manager coming up to me and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm working really hard. And he's like, "I'm going to be the best pizza girl you've ever had. I want to get promoted again." I don't even know how to get promoted to, but promotion sounded good to me. And he was like, "Slow down. Do you want everyone to hate you?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Don't do more than 10. Our goal is 10. Don't do any more after 10. If you could get more than 10 done during your free time here, then slow down. You don't want to get more than 10 done. That 10 is all we're doing." And I was like, "Whoa, what is this?" And I can remember it going, "Wow, so this is what the real world is like." It's not that you're supposed to be the best. And so clearly there, they didn't want to have a thing where, if one person got 15, then the goal would be 15 for everyone. So they kept these norms of low productivity. And so now that I really wanted everyone in the place to like me. So now that I was a more cohesive member, I knew to keep my productivity really low. That could help explain why this is going on, why this is lower than this. Because for highly cohesive groups that have low productivity norms, performance is going to be low. But performing well, that's only going to happen in your high performance teams, is going to lead to cohesion. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so that's that. Okay, yeah. And the relationship between cohesion and performance is stronger and more interdependent the team is. Obviously, in a basketball team where everyone's super interdependent, cohesion is going to be way more important for performance than a swim team, where really everyone's pretty independent, but you just add them all up to see who wins. You can see how cohesion is going to be much more important in a basketball team than a swim team. I'm surprised even now how little research there is on what leads really to cohesion, other than these three different kinds of cohesion, like extroversion, emotional stability, things like this. And I could list 50 others. There's not much research on this at all. Okay. Okay, so now we are going to switch gears a lot. We've talked about what makes or what are the characteristics of a working group, and cohesion is one of them. We talked about 3 different kinds of cohesion. We talked about how you develop cohesion, or how groups develop at all, and how people become members and then exit the group. We talked about the relationship between cohesion and performance and cohesion. Now I want to step way back and talk about understanding group performance outside, in addition to, or cohesion. Okay, so we want to really understand what can we do to make a group as high performing as it can. And obviously, one thing is to have norms that support high performing group members and high performance. And I mean, it's ridiculous when I look back on it at Papagino's that manager told me that. Who was that person's manager that set up a system like that? It was kind of goofy. So I think it's pretty obvious to most people to have norms of high productivity set up, that that's going to increase your productivity, increase your group performance. But there's a lot that science has to say about understanding group performance, a lot. But to look at group performance, you really have to split it up into two very separate things. They relate to one another, but they're separate. We know that when people perform tasks in the presence of other people, and if you're working in a group, then much of the time when you're performing your task, you're performing the task in the presence of other people. We know that just the presence of other people affects your performance. So I need to talk about that by itself. And that's not really working with other people, it's working in front of other people. Then in addition to that, we have the working with other people, coordinating with them, talking with them, all that kind of stuff, the actually working with them. But these are two very separate things. So to finish up this part one of the working groups, group performance and group decision making, I am going to talk about this, understanding the effect of the presence of others on performance. And then in the next video, we're going to talk about understanding working with others. We're going to talk about some potential pitfalls that groups can fall into. And then we're going to talk about teams. Okay, so right now, remember, we're just going to talk about the effect on performance of the presence of other people. And so if you just step back and think about it for a moment, do you tend to ride your bike faster if you're riding your bike alone? You're on riding your bike alone. Or do you go faster if there's someone with you? And for most of us, we're going to ride our bikes a little faster if there's someone riding next to us. Okay. That your book calls social facilitation. Sometimes the presence of others helps our performance. But now let's think of a different example. If we were in an actual classroom and I was going to ask you to multiply 351 times 2,182, and I ask you, would you rather do this on the board in front of everyone, or would you rather do it at your desk? Well, as a graduate student, I know you know how to multiply those two numbers, but most of you would say, I would prefer to do it at my desk rather than in front of everyone. And the research is clear that if you do it in front of everyone, you're more likely to make mistakes than if you were to do it at your desk alone. Your textbook calls this social inhibition, the fact that sometimes the presence of others hurts performance. Now, I love how your textbook keeps these, calls it these things. In most more up-to-date textbooks, they call both of these things social facilitation. So outside of this class, outside of this textbook, social facilitation oftentimes means sometimes the presence of others helps performance and sometimes the presence of others hurts performance. And I've always seen it as a misnomer since facilitate means to help. So I like the way your textbook separates it, but know that if you're like looking at an article, a research article, and they're talking about social facilitation, it's going to include both of them. Okay. So I'm sure you're sitting here going, well, how come sometimes the presence of others helps performance and sometimes the presence of others hurts performance? And the man who came up with a theory to explain this his name is Zions. I know it looks like Zadjunk. I remember sitting in one of my graduate level classes, and the professor had Zadjunk on the board and kept talking about this guy named Zions and this great theory he had, and Zions's theory, Zions. And I was like, why does it say Zadjunk? And who's this Zions he keeps talking about? Till finally I realized you pronounce Zajonc as Zions. So Zions's drive theory of social facilitation. Oops. So this is Zions's theory. And there is a diagram in your textbook that you might find useful. I thought I had it in the slides, but I do not. But I can just tell you about it. So Zions believes that the presence of others increases your arousal. And it's not just Zions who believes that. That's really easy to prove. The presence of other people increases a person's heart rate, increases our arousal. But it's not just people. Cockroaches, monkeys, gorillas, zebras, whole bunch of the animal kingdom. And like I said, cockroaches, not even the animal kingdom. The presence of same species others increases arousal. So the presence of others increases arousal. Now, science says that when our arousal is increased, we're more likely to make what he calls dominant responses. Now, in a minute, I'll get to what a dominant response is, but just logically think about this. If a dominant response is correct, then the presence of others that's increasing your arousal, making the dominant response more likely, and the dominant response is correct, that's going to increase your performance or enhance performance. So when the dominant response is correct, the presence of others is going to help your performance. However, sometimes that dominant response is going to be wrong. So the presence of others that increases your arousal, that increases the likelihood of the dominant response, when that dominant response is wrong, it's going to decrease performance. So the presence of others is going to decrease performance in situations where the dominant response is incorrect. Does that make sense? Okay, so now what's a dominant response? It's actually well named. Your dominant response is the response that you're most likely to make all of the time. So if I go 2 + 2 is, you guys say 4, right? You say 4, that's your dominant response to someone saying 2 + 2 is, your dominant response is going to be 4. That's your dominant response because you have that. You've been asked that question probably 1,000,000 times. It's probably an exaggeration, but many, many, many times in your lifetime. If I ask that same question to a 3-year-old, 2 + 2 is, they're probably not going to come up with 4 because it's not a well-rehearsed, well-known task for them. It's relatively new and they may not even know what you're asking. Does that make sense? So dominant responses are responses that we're most likely to give in any situation. And they tend to be correct. I mean, the answer to 2 + 2 is 4. They tend to be correct if they're either simple tasks or tasks that have been rehearsed a number of times and they're really well known. However, dominant responses tend to be wrong for new tasks or tasks that are complex, tasks that aren't well rehearsed at all. They're new and novel and different. Okay. I'll give another example that I give when I talk about this in the undergraduate class that students have come back later and said, it resonated with them. So when I was in high school, I was on the gymnastics team. So I did the balance beam. And so I'd be doing, now you have to do all of them, but back then you just had one. So I'd do my routine, I'd practice my routine on the balance beam, practice, 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 practice during the week at our practices. Then there'd be the meet, the big event where you would be on the balance beam in front of the judges. And I'd be, let's say, doing my cartwheel on the balance beam. According to science's drive theory of social facilitation, I had rehearsed that cartwheel so many times on the balance beam, just tons and tons of time. So my dominant response, when you put me on the beam, I'm going to be able to do a cartwheel that's going to look exactly like it's supposed to look. Is that going to make sense? So when the judges are looking at me doing this, the presence of others, it's going to increase my arousal, which is going to make it more likely for that dominant response to occur. That dominant response is going to be correct. So I'm going to do even better at the meets than I do during practice alone. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, when no one's watching me. So that's a well-rehearsed, well-known dominant response is correct task of me doing a cartwheel on the balance beam in high school. Okay, high school was a long time ago. I'm in my 60s now. I have not been on a balance beam since I left high school. Never did it in college, never did it after college. I will say I was also on the swim team in high school, and I love swimming. To this day, I swim whenever I can. I love it. It makes me feel good. I was on the track team in high school. I ran some in college, some in graduate school, never on a team or anything, but just for fun. But I don't like running anymore. I remember liking it some, but I don't like it anymore. I don't do it anymore. But gymnastics, I never did. I loved being on the team. I don't know that I ever really liked it. I liked being on the team. I liked the other people on the team. I don't, I've not been on a balance beam since I left high school. I have not done a cartwheel hardly at all in decades. Does that make sense? I can remember trying to do one when my daughter was at the age to where she started to take gymnastics, and I was appalled at how pathetic my attempt at a cartwheel was, not even on a balance beam, just on the grass in front of our house. So now, if you put me on a balance beam to do a cartwheel, I would probably end up hurting myself. The presence of doing it in front of a judge or someone else that would increase, or anyone looking, that would increase my arousal, my dominant response now, after decades of never being on the balance beam, looks nothing like what a real cartwheel looks like. And that's what my dominant response, that's what's going to happen. So my dominant response is going to be wrong, and the presence of others is going to make my performance even worse. So as bad as my cartwheel would look doing it alone in this office where there's no one else here, it would look even worse if anyone was watching me. Does that make sense? The presence of others is going to make it worse. And this is a cute study that Zions did with cockroaches. And he gave cockroaches either a simple task. So remember, a simple task, your dominant response is going to be correct. So they should be doing better in the presence of others. And this was a maze that they had to go through. And this is how long, the y-axis is how long it took them to do the maze. So the quicker you are, the better you are. And you can see when they were running the maze and there were other cockroaches in the maze, or a cockroach at the top that could see, or that was like in a glass case. So the cockroaches in the maze could see that a cockroach is watching them. They were faster than if they were put in the maze alone. But for a complex maze, this maze is going to be more difficult. And remember, on these difficult, not well-rehearsed, new, novel tasks, your dominant response is going to be wrong or incorrect. So the presence of others is going to hurt performance. And you could see it took them longer to solve the task, to run through the maze, than it did when they were working alone. Okay? So that's one thing. Now we have a big question to ask ourselves. Why does the presence of others increase arousal? Everyone knows that when your arousal is increased, your dominant response is more likely. When it's right, it's going to help performance. When it's wrong, it's going to hurt performance. No argument there. But there are lots of arguments of why does the presence of others increase arousal? Why does this happen? So Zions's idea, he called it mere presence. He said it does, it's just the way we're wired. And he used as proof of this, he goes, it's true in cockroaches, it's true in lower primates, it's just how people are wired. There must be some evolutionary adaptive advantage to having it this way. So the mere presence, that's all you need, is another person in the room, and your arousal is going to go up. And at this point, most researchers believe that that's true, that it does play a role, but they believe other things can also play a role too, that mere presence really does work, but there may be some other things also. So there are some theorists out there who put out this idea of evaluation apprehension. And they said that when we're doing a task in front of other people, we are a little bit nervous or worried that those people are going to evaluate us negatively. They're going to think that we're not doing a good job. They're going to think we're doing it weird. They're going to think we're not doing it the way it ought to be done. And so we become apprehensive, which is arousal, right? If you're apprehensive, you're nervous, you're worried, that's going to increase your heart rate, increase your arousal level. We're apprehensive that we're going to be negatively evaluated. So that's evaluation apprehension. So evaluation apprehension, they're not saying mere presence doesn't also play a role, but they're saying in addition to having other people there, and from an evolutionary perspective, that increases our heart rate. In addition to that, sometimes we're kind of nervous that the other person's going to be evaluating us negatively. And the evaluation apprehension people show some support for this by, if the people that are watching you are friends, you tend to perform even better on a simple task and even worse on a complex task than if they're people who are judges or people that are strangers. So that kind of shows evaluation apprehension, probably is playing a role. Another theorist came up with the idea of self-presentation. And this idea is that anytime we are with another person, we are to some extent negotiating with that person who it is that we are. So this is very similar to when we were in chapter 3 talking about the that self-validation theory. So remember that we want other people to validate our sense of who we are. Well, self-presentation theory is saying that when we're performing a task, not only do we have to perform the task that we're trying to perform, but we're also trying to get the person to see us the way we want them to see us. Does that kind of make sense? Maybe it's see us as competent. Maybe it's see us as warm. Maybe it's see us as physically attractive. Who knows? But we're trying to present ourselves and negotiate who we are to that person who's watching us, in addition to having to do the task. So because there's more than one task to do, there's 2 tasks now, you're going to be more aroused. Anytime you've got more tasks, that's more stress, more that has to get done, it's going to increase your arousal. And the last idea, and the last one is not saying that the other 3 don't exist. These can all be going on at the same time. The last one is this idea of distraction conflict. And this is the idea that when you're doing a task in the presence of others, not only do you have to do the task, but you have to attend to what the people who are watching, how are they interpreting what you're doing? Are they, like, is a judge making a face, or is your partner making your work partner making a face? Like, what is she talking about? Are they like scrolling their eyebrows and making it seem like they're displeased? Are they nodded and all excited? In addition to doing the task you're trying to do, you have to attend to the other people that are there watching you. And that can distract you. It kind of gives you another task. And also sometimes that may cause you some conflict. If they seem upset, or if you wanted them to be upset and they seem happy, that could add. So this distraction, this extra task that you have to do, increases arousal. Okay? And there's evidence for all of these. All right. Well, that is the end of our part 1 for this chapter. If you have it in you, you can just go right to part 2, or if you want to take a little break, you can come back and watch part 2 later. All right.